Today we're going to re-grease a Sturmey Archer internal gear hub on a Brompton. This hub was brand new to me, I want to say around 2012. So that gives you an idea of when Brompton was utilizing these hubs. I believe they're still utilizing this Sturmey Archer today. A caveat here, I do not highly recommend this procedure. It's very complicated and there's a lot of room for error in this. This is not the sort of procedure I don't believe that Brompton recommends. I don't think there are any guidelines out there for this. And as we get into this, you might see why. There's lots of little parts in here that could be lost or broken, and the result would be you'd have to buy a whole new hub. So these hubs are $200 plus, so keep that in mind before you undertake this. And I'll do my best to show you how everything works in there in case you do decide to do this and get stuck. So your first step, of course, is to remove the wheel. Once you've got the wheel removed, well, we can start taking this apart. And so there are bearings on both sides of the wheel, and mainly that's our point here, is that we want to re-grease, remove the old grease that's built up or worn out, so to speak, over time, and put in new grease. On the simpler side of the wheel, the non-chain side or the non-cog side, you've got very simply a nut on the very outside, a thick washer after that, and then a bearing race after that, right next to the hub. And then the bearings themselves are held in place, or sort of pressed in there, so you're not going to be able to get the bearings out to really pack these with grease. So it makes it a little bit awkward as we go along. On the cog side, or the chain side of the hub, you've got, on the very outside, you've got a thin nut, and there's a square washer, and that square washer meets up with the bearing race. Once you remove the bearing race, there's a spring and a little washer type thing that fits over the spring that meets up against the bearing race. And that spring, it pushes down a piece in the assembly that helps with the shifting, basically. Once you've removed the spring, you can then remove the whole assembly that has the cogs attached to it. And on the back side of that assembly is another part of the internal gears. But keep that in mind. Nothing's going to spring out on you after that spring, at least. But there are stuff on the back side of that, so pay attention when you're taking it apart as far as how it looks and how it's set up. So there's that piece there that the spring holds down, and this is what it looks like as it's rotating around. It just clicks as you're going, and there's a bunch of other moving parts inside the hub. But this is about as far as you can get, or as far as I was willing to go on disassembly. Anything past this, things are press fit in there and not so easy to remove without damaging them. Basically, there's nothing else you can remove without damaging it. At this point, I'm using disc brake cleaner, which is basically a pressurized alcohol type solution to dissolve the existing grease and dirt that's inside the hub and remove that. Then it will evaporate quite quickly and dry out, and then I can go back in and start packing things with grease. Because these bearings were hard to reach, I couldn't quite get to them easily. I am applying a bit more grease than I would have liked. I did try and go back and remove some of that grease later on. But now I'm reaching down into the hub assembly. As we saw earlier, there are internal moving parts in there. I sprayed a bunch of the disc brake cleaner down in there, so I'm sure I dissolved a bunch of the old grease, and I want to make sure I get some new grease back in there. So I'm doing my best to pack that in with my finger. If you had some sort of small rubbery spatula type thing that you could push grease in there, it would probably be a lot neater operation. And then this little guy right here, you do not want to lose this. This is the part that your hub chain threads into, in this piece, there's a slot in the axle itself, which this piece fits through, and in that little hole in the center of that rectangle is where your hub chain threads into. The hole is bigger on one side of this rectangle than the other, and that bigger side is what faces out and meets up with the chain. When you're putting this back through that slot in the axle, make sure that the bigger hole faces outward. So putting that little rectangle piece back in is not easy either. If you have some needle nose pliers, that might make it easier. I managed to do this with my fingers, and I was able to manipulate it with a little stick basically to get it into position. And once that's in position, here's the other part. This guy right here is the other part that slides over the axle, and you can see those little raised parts on this piece. That's where that little rectangle fits into there and slides up and down, and so this part slides over the axle and over that rectangle. And so when you're putting this on, you want to take care that that rectangle aligns properly inside of this piece. And so it's very easily to knock that rectangle out of position, and so you may have to do this a couple of times to get it correct. And how do you know it's correct? Well, the best way is to test it before you continue on the assembly, is to test that by threading the hub chain back through the axle and making sure that you're actually connecting with that little rectangle. You'll know that you are by pulling the chain, and if when you pull the chain that whole piece slides up, you know that you've got a correct connection and that everything is aligned properly. At that point, you can remove the chain again and continue on with the assembly. Alright, and so the next piece, there's a bearing set that goes on the back side of that little cog assembly. You want to grease that, and then there's a race that fits into on the hub itself. You also want to give a little bit of grease to the mechanism on the back side of that cog, as that is a moving part. And to explain how that part works, because this is also a point in the mechanism that could give you trouble after you're taking this apart. There is a little cover part there that I'm going to remove to show you the mechanism better. They're basically two little square pieces on opposite sides of this mechanism. What these do, they engage with the inside walls of the hub and basically transfer the pedal power from the cog to the hub to make the wheel go around, which is fairly amazing considering how fragile these things appear to be when you've got them outside of the hub. Basically, they're held onto this cog mechanism by a small wire that acts sort of like a spring. They want to spring out as they are right now at basically a 30-degree angle. So when you're pedaling, these would catch on little grooves on the inside of the hub. The cover that goes on top of these has a little bit of play to it. It's supposed to move or rotate slightly, and it will, when it does rotate, it covers these up and pushes them down, or opens up and allows them to pop out a little bit. The spring action inside this is going to want to push those little square pieces out. When you're going to put this back into the hub, those little square pieces that stick up, they're going to make it hard to get it into the hub. So you can rotate that cover slightly to push those down, and then stick it on there, and it should make it a little bit easier. And you can see everything should fit flat very nicely against the hub, and then it should connect, engage with the hub like so. You'll feel it connect, and then once you've got that in satisfactorily, you can put the spring in. Make sure you've got that little washer type thing on the end of the spring, and then you can put your bearing race in. And at this point you might want to, you've got a bearing race on both sides of the hub. You want to tighten the cog side first all the way down, and then do the non-cog side to get the axle. The axle does have a little bit of play back and forth, not a whole lot. So rotate the wheel, spin the wheel. Basically you want it to spin as fast as possible and for as long as possible, but you don't want any play in the axle itself. So the axle, if you try and move it up and down, there shouldn't be any play in the axle. You're looking for the fine line between no play in the axle and being able to spin the wheel for as fast and as long as possible. So once you've got the bearing race set up as best you can, then go ahead and install the rest of the nuts on both sides, and then go through the whole test procedure of the wheel again. And again, you're looking for the same outcome. You want it to be, you want no play in the axle, but yet you also want the wheel to spin as fast and as long as possible. So doing this by feel, it's going to take you a bit of time and some practice. You'll get a lot of practice doing this. You should get the idea and a good feel for it, and it should work. And then again, once everything is to your satisfaction, go ahead and put the wheel on the bike. And once it's on the bike, go ahead and fold that wheel under, pedal the bike, spin the wheel, and make sure you still got a good long spin on that wheel. And then once you're happy with that, then go ahead and connect the cable to the hub, adjust that until all the gears are clicking through correctly, and then go ahead and take it for a test ride if you need to test the gears, make sure everything's working, make sure that the wheel feels the way it should. You may have to come back through and disassemble and reassemble the wheel, make adjustments until you've got everything the way you want it. So good luck. This is a tough one. So once you've got the bearing race set up as best you can, then go ahead and install the rest of the nuts on the outside of the hubs, and then go ahead and install the rest of the nuts on both sides, and then test it again to see, and then then go through the whole test procedure of the wheel again, and again you're looking for the same outcome. You want it to be, you want no play in the axle, but yet you also want the wheel to spin as fast and as long as possible. So doing this by feel, it's going to take you a bit of time and some practice. You'll get a lot of practice doing this, but you should get the idea for it. But you should get the idea, and you should get the idea and a good feel for it, and it should work. And then once everything is to your satisfaction, go ahead and put the wheel on the bike, and once it's on the bike, go ahead and fold that wheel under and spin the wheel, pedal the bike, spin the wheel, and make sure you still got a good long spin on that wheel. So, and then once you're happy with that, go ahead and connect the cables. Go ahead and connect the cable to the hub, and go ahead and connect the cable to the hub and adjust that until all the gears are clicking through correctly, and then go ahead and take it for a test ride if you need to test the gears, make sure everything's working, make sure that the wheel feels the way it should. If need to, you might have to come back through, take the wheel off, and disassemble and disassemble. You may have to come back through and disassemble and reassemble the wheel, make adjustments until you've got everything the way you want it. So, good luck. This is a tough one.